Into this week at Gridiron Icon, and we have a true icon joining Preston Denard and myself this week. Couldn't be more excited. Our guest this week is a former college football player at Wyoming. In fact, in the Wyoming Hall of Fame, who went on to play in the old AFL as it merged with the NFL as a defensive back, drafted in 1969 by the St. Louis Cardinals, and went on to play on those legendary Sid Gilman San Diego Charger teams. He coached at several college powers, including New Mexico, Arizona State, and Ohio State. But perhaps he is best known as the longtime coach and mentor of the Indianapolis Colts running back room, where he won a Super Bowl and coached Hall of Famers such as Marshall Faulk and Edgerrin James. We want to welcome in the iconic Coach Gene Huey. Thanks, Gene.
What an introduction. Thank you, Stace.
And Preston leads the cheering section as I know you're dear friends and whatnot.
Right.
The crowd goes wild.
That's a fantastic introduction.
Well, you're a fantastic guest. We're so happy to have you. Thank you for joining us on Gridiron Icon. It turns out Preston and I have a few questions for you and the fans, but whether they're in Indianapolis or one of those college schools. And of course, gosh, some of the names you've coached are just incredible. So here we go. We're coming for you, Coach. I hope you're ready.
I'm ready.
Can you take us back to, as we do with every guest, we like to go back to the beginning because each person is a personality and a gift to this planet. Can you just take us back to when you were a kid? How did you, or were you even interested in the sport of football back when you were a younger man? And just tell us what you were doing back then.
You know, my family was split up when I was a kid. My mother had tuberculosis, so we went with we split the family up and went with the maternal and the paternal grandparents. So my paternal grandmother took me and two other siblings in, and the other two went with the maternal grandparents. And so that's where I got my first introduction into sports as a kid in grade school in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, which is 50 miles south of Pittsburgh in the southwestern corner of the state, 25 miles from Morgantown, West Virginia. And so, you know, just that's where I got my exposure to sports and started playing. I think I got my first football uniform when I was probably in third or fourth grade. And shoulder pads, helmet, you know. And in those days, they had those old couches called the settee, and you pick it up and it would conform to an L shape, and you put your pads underneath that couch and close it back up, and that's where I hid all my stuff. You know, it's kind of cool.
Wow.
You put it on, tied up with the shoestring that was in the shoulder pads, and a little plastic green helmet with a white stripe down the middle of it. So and played a place called Bailey Park, where a lot of us in Uniontown at that time played a lot of sports, baseball particularly, some football down there. But I also grew up in Uniontown and having the Muncie brothers as teammates. Nelson Muncie played for the Colts. Nelson and I were roommates in college at Wyoming. Chuck Muncie, of course, his brother, played for Cal Berkeley and in the league for quite some time. And there's an older brother named George, another brother named Bill Muncie, played up in Minnesota with Sandy Stevens. So all those people that are in my hometown and growing up as a kid was awesome. But, you know, I look back and my real heroes are those garbage men. It may sound funny, garbage man, but those guys were out there lifting those aluminum cans with heavily weighted down with all kinds of debris on them, what have you. And in the winter months, those guys are out there with snot frozen to their mustaches and sweat off their faces. And they're lifting those aluminum cans and hauling trash and people's garbage. And you'd watch that, boy, and you saw people really come to work every day on time, getting it done in all kinds of weather and circumstances. So you look at people really doing their jobs at all times. And I grew up in Uniontown, spent some time living in projects and different things like that, and some independent homes. I never, not one daggone day, that I ever look at where I grew up as being poor. Because I was rich in the people that were in that diverse community. Jews, Italians, Lebanese, Syrian, Poles, Czechs, you name it. I was exposed to it in that small community of Uniontown, Pennsylvania. And I tell people, and I sincerely mean this, I mean it today, there's nothing that I've ever done or accomplished in sports that compares to where I grew up in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. Nothing.
Wow.
And it was the people, the community that I grew up in, and I maintained those relationships and friendships with people back there still today. And every time I go home and come off of Route 70, hitting 51, going south, your heart starts pounding because you're nearing home. And then there's a cross up on Jamonville, up on the mountain. You can see that thing lit up at night, and it tells you you're home safely. And all those memories that I, gathered as a kid, junior high school, participating in sports was fantastic. Nothing better than growing up where I grew up. And those elders and mentors in my own life that helped me along my own course of life as to where I am today. And those were the great people, those elders in my hometown, the Muncie family, Stevens family, Spider Minor, Joe Thomas, who was a policeman. Spider was our basketball coach in the summer league and on the playgrounds. Connie Hawkins would come from Pittsburgh to play basketball.
Connie Hawkins, yeah.
Wow.
Jerry West would come up from Morgantown, West Virginia to play basketball there in the summer leagues.
Oh.
And, just a fantastic situation where I grew up. Chuck Muncie's house is right across from the playground. And Mrs. Muncie would sit out there in that J.C. Penney dress and put a crease in the middle of it and watch us all. She just watched us. She knew everything about where everybody was, and neighborhoods, took care of neighborhoods. As they say, it takes a village to raise kids and so forth. And it was very true. Mm-hmm. But more so their respect. And I heard Preston talking on a podcast about the day's athletes and how it was back when he played, and the respect given to each other and the shared times and memories. Those are the things that I grew up with. And I'll never, ever compromise that. Not in my coaching profession, which I never have and I never will. And I've been in some situations to where I would not give in to that and compromise. Having met Ernie Davis when I was in 9th grade.
Wow.
Ernie was born in New Salem, which is just a few miles outside of Uniontown. But he moved into Uniontown as a kid, and he and Sandy Stevens were teammates in junior high school. I shouldn't say junior high school, but grew up playing sports together in grade school. Now, Ernie, as everybody knows, won the Heisman in 1961, was the number one guy on the Heisman, playing at Syracuse. He was a three-sport player, football, basketball, baseball, growing up in Uniontown. Then his mother moved him to Elmira, New York. She got a job up there and left and went up there, and then the rest is history. He ended up going to Syracuse and being the first person of color to win the Heisman in 61. But I'll back up, because when I go home now, one of the first stops I make is to see his aunt when I'm in town, or I make sure I include her. Going to dinner, just talking. She's one of those elders, one of those old heads, as they say. Mm-hmm. Now, Ernie won the Heisman in 61. That was number one. I met him when I was in 9th grade, and he came to that locker room. His nephew I played junior high school and high school football with, and he looked like a Greek Adonis. Just sculpted, and a handsome, tall guy, 6'2", 211, 12 pounds, whatever. And then he, I was sitting there in my locker. I had a little private space, and I hung my clothes behind the furnace, and I had a nail back there, and it's my own little enclave, if you will, and it was kind of cool. It was my little space. But I remember him coming out of the locker room when I was in junior high school, and he just was, my mouth fell open. I know, just like everybody else's, but here was the guy just won the Heisman standing in my locker room,
It's incredible.
Now, he was one on that, and the number 4 guy was Sandy Stevens.
Oh,
Sandy
really?
played football at University of Minnesota in the late 50s and early 60s. Chuck Muncie's brother Bill and Sandy were teammates at Minnesota and the Murray Warmath. And Sandy was a quarterback there. he was, and I have to phrase it this way. I sincerely mean this. Because you can look at the league the way it is today, NFL, college, and so forth. And I think back to when several weeks ago when Todd Bowles got interviewed by a reporter, and I can't quote it, the remarks and so forth, but in the sense of the reporter was asking him, how does it feel to be a black coach in the NFL playing against another black coach? I think that's what I remember. I'm not certain.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I think what happens is you marginalize people. First of all, right off the bat, black head coach, black this, black that. And I kind of lean towards the thing of saying American first, American of color, American of whatever, but American first, just like anybody else. So I look at Sandy Stevens, who took Minnesota to their first and only national championship as a quarterback. He was an American football player who happened to be black. Ernie Davis took Syracuse to their first and only national championship in 1961, and he won the Heisman as an American person of color. American first. Both those guys grew up in my hometown. They were 1-4 in the 1961 Heisman vote getting. Number 2 was Bob Ferguson from Ohio State, and I think third was Jimmy Saxon from Texas. But those are things I'm most proud of in those relationships. And on top of that, when the Sandy Stevens thing, the quarterback, played ball in Minnesota, he was one of my heroes. His brother and I were high school teammates. I sat in Tony Dungy's office, and he was the 4th head coach that I coached for here at the Colts. And he said to me, he said, Gene, I wasn't sitting in his office. I was just standing there and we were talking briefly. He said, Sandy Stevens is the reason why I went to the University of Minnesota.
Wow. Interesting.
And he told me that, and I knew what he was saying. And he didn't come out. He didn't have to. Right. He didn't have to be explicit and define what he was trying to tell me. I already knew what he was saying to me. Here's a man, an American, Tony Dungy, whose dad was a Tuskegee, wasn't an airman, but he was with that group in Tuskegee, Alabama, the airman. And Tony told me he didn't know that. Even when it was on the easel at his dad's funeral that our whole team, the Colts, attended. But when Tony told me that story about Sandy Stevens being the reason why he went to Minnesota, I went back to my office and I kind of teared up because I thought, man, this is awesome. 2 dudes from my hometown, Ernie Davis, Sandy Stevens, and Sandy's a quarterback playing at Minnesota. And the man that I'm working for today in the NFL as a head coach, very well respected. Everybody knows who Tony is. Oh, yeah. And he's telling me this, that the reason why he went to Minnesota was he could play quarterback. Wow. We all know what that meant. He could play quarterback at Minnesota because who? Sandy Stevens went there before him in the late 50s and won. It was part of winning a national championship for the University of Minnesota. So when people put that thing in there, black head coach, black running back, black this, black actor, black, why not just say American first? And that's the way I come to look at it. And I don't cringe so much. I can handle it. And, you know, what do you want to be called? You want to be African American? You want to be called colored, Negro, black? All the previous. And I know I'm getting off on this a little bit, but it's so important to me because I've seen it in college football. I've seen it in places where I've worked. I've seen examples of it in Nebraska, where I worked for 10 years to the present. Turner Gill was a great player. Oh, yeah. In high school in Texas. Yeah. Then Turner Gill goes to the University of Buffalo after having coached the Heisman Trophy winner at Nebraska, Eric Crouch.
We're losing you, I think we're losing your phone. There you go, Coach.
Scott Frost also.
Eric Crouch was a heck of a player too. Yeah.
And I know I'm going on. You guys stop me if you want.
No, we love. You're a great storyteller.
I forgot to tell you that, Stacy.
Yeah, thank you, Preston. Thank you.
Stacey, Preston, I'm sitting here at Nebraska, coached there for 10 years, and I see a guy like Turner Gill, and this is still it's a burr in my saddle, even still today. I was there when he played. We had Irving Fryer, who I coached, was the number 1 pick in '84 draft. And we were a running football team with Roger Craig and Mike Rozier.
Yeah.
And Irving was #1 pick as a receiver. I had other fantastic athletes in that group of people as receivers. And here's Turner Gills, the quarterback, who helps Tom Osborne and the University of Nebraska win 3 Big 8 championships. Coach, Heisman Trophy winner, and Eric Crouch. Coach Scott Frost ends up at the University of Buffalo, resurrects their program, and he can't even get an interview at the University of Nebraska.
Really, Turner Gill?
Never did. That I don't think he never got an interview, and it bothers me. It bothers me today that never occurred.
Yeah, he's Cornhusker royalty. I mean, I grew up watching Turner Gill.
Yes, but those are my things. And then I might be off on a different tangent here.
It's okay.
It's not necessarily sports talk, but it's all interrelated to a large degree based on history and things I've witnessed and seen and been exposed to and see why. And you ask why. So, but go ahead. I'm gonna stop there and let you guys ask your questions.
No, that's
that's
incredible. It's incredible.
I had to mention that because it's been something that's on my consciousness for a while, and I see people. And here's another example. I'll come back to this thing a little bit.
No, this is fantastic depth.
Yeah, it is. It is.
The Rooney Rule in the NFL, and I'm seeing it with Raheem Morris just today, and others is a big combo. But I want to give Preston a chance to jump in here.
So let me kind of set the flavor here. So all of our customers who are and listeners and watchers of this, they really don't know this relationship. So I'm going to back this thing up. Gene and I are closer than you actually think. So I'm going to bypass and step over a little bit of his college days. We'll come back to it. But in 1974, I was recruited by the University of New Mexico. Had no idea who was there. On my recruiting trip, I end up going to meet the receivers coach. And it happened to be Coach Huey. And he and I have talked about this several times, and I walk into his office. I meet him for the first time. He gets up on the chalkboard. He has his pen in his hand, and he's already got some diagrams up front. I'm sure he's getting ready to drill me. I don't know a thing. I just know how to catch the ball, right? So he gets ready to draw something. He stops, and he turns around, and he looks at me, and I'm the only guy in the room. And he says to me, or asks me, let me just ask you a question. Can you catch the ball? And right away, I said, yes, I can. He dropped the pen. We walked out of that room, and the rest of the recruiting trip took place. I ended up signing with University of New Mexico, and Gene was my coach for 3 years there before he went on. I believe you went to Nebraska after that,
I
right?
did. Yes,
yeah.
I did.
And he went to Nebraska. And I tell you what, the relationship that built then continued from an 18-year-old, and I'm 67 now, and this man is, my mom loves him. My dad loved him. They used to, Gene, I'm going to let you take it. But I have a big question. You coached some Hall of Famers. You've probably coached a ton of guys that went to the pros. I've never asked you this question. Where was I? Was I your first NFL athlete you coached?
You were, because I was at Wyoming after I finished playing pro ball in that short career of 2 years. I went back to Wyoming, and I was a graduate assistant coach under Leon Burtnett.
Mm-hmm.
And Leon Burtnett was the secondary coach, and I went back to Wyoming as a GA under him, and then eventually got hired as the freshman coach by Fritz Shermer, long-term NFL assistant coach. Yeah. And Fritz was with Mike Holmgren at the New England. He was with Holmgren at the Packers, Holmgren at Seattle. Then he got cancer and died. But Fritz had a lot to do with the start of my career. He was a defensive coordinator at Wyoming under Lloyd Eaton, who was the head coach then when I was a player. And then there's a GA and then the head freshman coach. And I had a chance to come to New Mexico in '74 to coach. And that was because of Del White having talked to Paul Roach. Mm-hmm. Del was the defensive coordinator at New Mexico under Bill Mont, who was the head coach there.
Right.
Became the head coach in '74 after being an assistant under Rudy Feldman. Well, Del White had asked, I think, Paul Roach, did he know of anybody who he could recommend as a receivers coach. And Paul, having coached me at the time at Wyoming when I was a player, recommended me. Then they contacted me. I interviewed and thought, hey, this would be nice. I was making $9,999.
Wow.
$9,999 at Wyoming as the head freshman coach. I don't know why they didn't throw the other dollar in there.
Yeah.
With taxes, you know.
Sounds like my rookie
laughing.
contract.
I still don't know the reason why they did it that way. So Fritz comes to me and goes, well, Gene, you know, you really don't, you think you want to get out of New Mexico? I said, wait a minute. They're doubling my salary, more than double, because they're giving me $20 grand. I'm only making $9,999 here. And they're giving me a car also to go to Albuquerque. So I'm gone, you know. And Fritz was great. And I had to laugh at it, but I understand why he wanted me to stay. You know, Fritz was trying to get that program back on track again, you know, because it had the Black 14 thing there in '69. Lloyd Eaton had been the head coach, where 14 athletes were kicked off the team for wanting to wear armbands and protested the Mormon Church and BYU, Latter-day Saints, what have you. So I thought, well, I'm going to take this opportunity to go, and I did. And that's when I came down to Albuquerque, University of Mexico, to coach. And Preston was the first. Yeah, you were the first.
Wow.
That I had coached, you know, on a varsity level, and as a position coach, being receivers coach at the time. And the thing, not just so much because of your skills and talents and abilities, which is all important. I mean, you were a team player. I was very much impressed the way you ran routes. I was a disciplined route runner. I liked the feel playing at Wyoming, and I had played both ways and made all conference both ways as the DB and a receiver. So you had a feel for those positions and what people were trying to do to you, setting you up with the routes and how to run routes, what have you. But I was always impressed with your speed, your ability, your quickness. You had a nice, smooth stride. You got into and out of routes and breaks, and you ran disciplined routes. That was important to me because I felt you had to be on the same page with that quarterback and running routes and be where he expects you to be. And you worked hard at it, and you enjoyed football. You made it enjoyable. You had good times with it. And I could sit here and go through all those things about an athlete and talents and abilities that he has. But one of the most impressive things is the family you came from. Your dad, Walt, your mother, Marion, sister, brother. And I remember you guys they'd pack up that car on Friday after Sandra's cheerleading. I think she's a cheerleader. And then they would motor over to Albuquerque. In the middle of the night, driving after her high school cheerleading thing. And they'd come over there and get there and see you play on Saturday. And I thought, that's nice. That's a family, boy. That's a family. And your dad, I remember recruiting your brother, and I was at Nebraska, and I was trying to recruit Glenn. And I'd come down to your house, and your dad was grilling. He was going to cook food because we're having a home visit by the head coach. That was Tom Osborne, and I was going to pick Tom up at the airport later that day. And Walt was grilling. And I said, Walt, I'd like for Glenn to come to the University of Nebraska. I can coach him. Oh, yeah, Gene, that'd be great. I looked at Walt. He was going up the stairs, Preston, at the house. Yeah. And he was taking food from the grill up into the house. We were going to sit and eat. I said, Walt, listen, there's no daggone way that Glenn comes to Nebraska. You guys can't drive overnight to get there. And so I said, he's going to stay where he's going somewhere else. He's not going to Nebraska. And I said, I'm supposed to pick Tom up in about an hour at the airport. I'm going to pick him up, but we're going to enjoy this food because I know Glenn's not coming.
Yeah.
This is epic. What a story.
Oh, it is.
Your mother today, I mean, just a beautiful woman, boy. You had great people in your life, and your mother and your dad and your family and support. It's been tremendous. And there are those athletes and families that you remember down through the years of being in their homes and recruiting them. And I've had a few of those. Doug Glazer, a kid at Nebraska, came out of Texas that I recruited there as a lineman. And his mother stayed true to form because Texas and other schools came in there late trying to turn him once they thought he was going to Nebraska. But Susan, his mother, she stayed committed along with him, and it worked out well for him. And there are others. There's many others like that in situations that I've always appreciated how they stood tall and strong in the face of a lot of pressure in recruiting and stood true to their words. And I've always remembered that, in the relationships and friendships. Jeff Merle, another kid I recruited out of Huntsville, Alabama, that came to Nebraska. Mitch Krink, tight end. And I think back some of the players in New Mexico, Walt Arnold, Preston Chu, Saul Waltman. I was down in December at the ALS golf outing. Robin Cole, Bruce Heron, Greg Jones, Max Hudspeth, Tommy Hudspeth's son played there.
Oh, wow.
And then, you had all these guys and Gil Stewart, geez, there's so many people, Steve Meyer, that I had the privilege of being on those teams. And that was one of the best jobs I've ever had. We didn't win a whole lot of games, but it was a great staff and a great working environment for me and a great place to live in the land of enchantment. So it was nice.
Well, Gene, let's back up a little bit. And I'm going to start up by a little comparison. When I was a freshman, I did something and you helped me garner this great honor that stands today. But as a freshman, I believe in 1974, it was the first time the NCAA allowed freshmen to play on the varsity. And I was on the freshman team. I think, Stacey, you may even remember a little bit of this story. Third game of the season. However that happened in the coaches meeting, you guys brought me up on the varsity, started me. Steve Byer ended up punting the rest of the season. And I ended up making all conference. And something that had never been done before in the Western Athletic Conference. And it held for about 13, 15 years until another young man from Wyoming, freshman receiver. And I can't remember who it is. I want to say Ryan Yarbrough, but I could be wrong. But Wyoming had a freshman receiver that ended up garnering all conference as a freshman. He ended up being the second one. I had some tremendous numbers. You helped produce that for me. Ended up being an All-American, leading the nation a couple of years. But when I look at Gene Huey, and I started really diving into these stats, I didn't know a lot of this stuff, but you had 98 passes, over 1,500 yards, 15.5 average. I think I had a 16.7. 14 touchdowns. I'd sneak that in there. Broke 13 receiving records at University of Wyoming and played in a couple of all-star games. You were huge. And when I was playing ball, I didn't know a lot of this, but you ended up really, I believe your senior year, you had 43 passes for 626 yards and a couple of bowl games, and you played in a championship game. You just had a great, great career and going two ways. And a lot of people don't realize the accomplishments you made in the Western Athletic Conference way before they started throwing the heck out of the ball. Tell us about that experience, being an athlete there during those times.
It's funny. You'll laugh at this one. They timed us as a freshman, right? So Lloyd Eaton, Fritz Sherman, all those guys, they got their stopwatches. So they were out there timing us on grass. And I think I ran a 4.8 something or a 4.9.
Really?
As a freshman, right? I'm laughing. You're laughing now, right? 4.9 shoot. And so then I remember Lloyd Eaton, those guys were looking at their stopwatch and they said 4.9. And I just looked at them and said, listen, at that time it was phrased this way. I said, not all black dudes are fast.
I love it.
Just understand that. Now, I would phrase that differently today after what I just said about 10 minutes ago. But at that time, and I got down to probably a 4.65, which rounds off to a 4.7. That's about what I was. But, you had to play quick. You had to play fast as you could. I remember playing against Arizona State when they were in the WAC, both Arizona State and Arizona. We beat Frank Cush, Arizona State teams 3 years in a row to win the WAC.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And they had J.D. Hill, who was an Olympic sprinter.
Mm-hmm.
They had, he ran by me one time, and I still hadn't seen him. But, he could smoke, boy. And luckily, the quarterback didn't see him because he was wide open. Yeah. I was playing defensive back at the time. And they had some great athletes there. But we beat them 3 years in a row. And I remember supposedly Frank came in our locker room and said, "I'll take guts." He wrote on a board, "I'll take guts over speed any day." And he was an old Western Pennsylvania guy himself, you know. And I had a chance to coach there with John Cooper before I went to Ohio State. And great football. And, you know, I just thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm going to go back for a second. I think it was Ron Yarborough that you were talking about, Preston. So, and go ahead and ask me that question again. I'm off on a tangent here, and I get
no. You're on it. Just basically your exploits and all the things you accomplished statistically just was outstanding. I mean, far greater than I would say anything that I did, and I had some really good numbers. But who was your receivers coach at that time when you were playing?
Well, Paul Roach. Paul was the running back. So we had Jim Kick. Jim was a year older than me.
Wow.
And Jim was there. There were 120 of us when I was a freshman.
Wow.
And by the time I was a senior, there were only 7 of us left. I ended up being a co-captain on that team with Jim House our senior year. We won our 3rd WAC championship. And I'll have to back up a year before that. We had been undefeated. We were the only undefeated untied team in the 1967 Wyoming football team. And we were chosen to play LSU in the Sugar Bowl in 1967. And, you know, and going down there to New Orleans to play them, I mentioned we were undefeated, untied, the only team in the nation to have that record. And we lost to them late in the ball game. I caught a pass and time expired on the 5-yard line. We had a chance. If we'd had a timeout, I might have suggested, hey, in those days you didn't say much back to quarterback. I'd say, hey, let's run a post corner. I go one-on-one with the corner, and I'm taking this ball. But we didn't have time to do it, and they set back a little bit of prevent and kept everything in front of them. And I caught the ball and got tackled on the 5-yard line. Time was gone. But we had a great team that year. And I was so proud of the fact that I was a part of that. And but Kick was on that team, a bunch of other guys. Mike LaHood was a guard. Mike was a Ram drafted player. Mike was a guard. He was the first pick for the Rams back in 60, I think I want to say 68. And Mike's out of Peoria, Illinois. And deceased now, but he was a guard on the Rams football team at the time.
Wow.
But we had great football team. And we'd beat Arizona State 3 years in a row with all that talent that they had. Speed personified. So that was all good. You know, and then getting drafted and going into the league, 5th round pick by the Cardinals.
Yeah.
And I would have preferred to play offense, but I think they had a strike that year, and I ended up playing defensive back, and they drafted me as a defensive back. And a guy named John O'Mahundra was the trainer, one of the trainers on the Cardinals staff, and I'm sure John recommended, hey, you need to go get this Wyoming guy, Gene Huey, you know. So I ended up with the Cardinals, 5th round draft pick. Roger Worley was number 1 out of Missouri. It was a great defensive back.
Yeah.
Great defensive back. And I just, you know, I was there a short period of time and got released on the last day. I was coming down the hall. We had broken camp from Lake Forest, Illinois. We're back in St. Louis. I was coming down the hall. The last day of cuts, wasn't even thinking. The secretary knocks on the glass window and motions to me to come inside. So I went inside. She says, "Coach, like to see you."
Oh no! I know that feeling already.
The last day of cuts.
No.
Yeah.
And so I got released, and I went up to you know, those days those coaches had connections up in Canada. So a guy named Ken Ship got me on with the Montreal Alouettes, and a guy named Kay Dalton was the head coach. So I go up there for a few weeks. They released me, and then Jim Figs picks me up at the Minnesota airport. I went with the Vikings. He was the general manager at the time, and stayed with the Vikings for a while. Ended up with San Diego Chargers for the rest of that season. Then went back to the Chargers the following year. Then they released me. I had about 2 years in the league, and that was it. It was a great experience, but I wanted to coach. figured I'm not going to chase this pot of gold at the end of that rainbow too much longer. And coaching is something I felt I could really get into and enjoy. And I did. So did that for 42 years, 23 in college and 19 with the Colts.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Outstanding.
The thing is, you read things and you go, oh, that's cool. That's nice. And I ended up being the longest tenured coach in the franchise history of the Colts. That was fun. It was a great time.
That is hardly ever known in the National Football League, and you did that with one team.
Yeah.
So we're heading into the fourth quarter of this podcast. So I want everybody to really know, and Stacy, you take it from here, the great experience of having the ability to coach two Hall of Famers.
The Colts running back room, Coach, it's unbelievable. You put two guys or had the impact, whether you will humbly admit it or not, on the lives of two of the greatest runners we've ever seen in this game. And Marshall Faulk is arguably the greatest multi-purpose running back. Of course, Walter Payton. I gotta bring up Walter. That I've ever seen in my life. Edgerrin James. Even guys like Dominic Rhodes, Joseph Adai.
Yeah.
Tell us, Coach, what's the secret to being a great running back? As a person who was a wide receiver DB, you even brought my co-host into the game. How did you end up with running backs, and what's the secret there?
I was at Ohio State coaching receivers. Time of most of my career in college, and then a friend of mine named Steve Peterson at the time. He and I had worked together in Nebraska. He ended up being on the administrative side at Ohio State. He suggested that I maybe entertain thoughts of coaching running backs. A guy named Bobby Turner had coached them with Jim Coletto there at one time at Purdue, but Bobby has been for a long time the running back coach at 49ers. And he was coaching the backs, and then I decided, okay, I'm going to get another shot at a different position and see how I might like it. And so I started coaching running backs at Ohio State. In 80, I went there in 89 from Arizona State, and I think it was 90, 91 that I started coaching the backs, and did that there and had some good players. But before that, in coaching receivers, I named Jeff Graham. Jeff was a one pick with the Steelers as a receiver out of Dayton, Ohio, and went there and played, and I switched over to running backs, and here it comes back full circle. While I was coaching running backs, Leon Burtonette, who I was a GA for in Wyoming, if you remember when I first started talking about this, Leon was coaching with Ron Meyer at the Colts at the time. He had been a Purdue head coach, got on with Ron Meyer with the Colts, calls me up at Ohio State, says, hey, why don't you come down and do the summer internship, the Bill Walsh internship. So I thought, okay, that'd be okay. But that NFL is a tight-knit fraternity. That's a hard one to break into. I wasn't reluctant. Well, go ahead and do it. You still have a college job. So I came down at his urging and coached for 2 weeks in camp. And then that was the end of it. And bid them all farewell and good luck, and went on back to my job coaching at Ohio State, running backs. And then as the season went on for the Colts, they had fired Ron Meyer, the head coach at the time, and then Rick Venturi became the interim, and Rick was a defensive coordinator. So then Rick calls me up and says, hey, if I get this job, I want to hire you as a running back coach. I said, that'll be fine, if that happens. And he didn't get it, so I figured, hey, you got a job at Ohio State. Then I get a phone call from Ted Marshall-Broda, who had been the head coach before when they were in Baltimore. And Jim Irsay hired him to be the head coach here and with the Colts in 92. And Ted called me and said, I'd like to talk to you about the possibility of being a running back coach here. He said, could you come down? And I got to set this scene for you a little bit. We're in the conference room, John Cooper sitting at the head of the table. And all these other guys, my colleagues, were sitting around the conference table too, right? So John takes a phone call. Oh, hey, Ted, how you doing? Ted,
Oh.
da, 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 da. It's all in earshot.
Oh my
no.
God.
Oh no.
Here's some guys that are looking at me like, what's going on here? Ted Marchibroda, that name, bang, here it goes. What are you up to? And I'm laughing like, like the cat who swallowed the canary, because I just got this phone call, and John Cooper hands me the phone, and I'm talking to Ted Marchibroda on the other side of the wall, but those guys can hear. I'm laughing and trying to be serious at the same time because I know what they're thinking. So then Ted and I arranged a date to come down to Indianapolis and to interview for the running back job that he had just gotten the head coaching job. I remember they had those old phones. Remember those big old Motorola phones, whatever, at the one time. So that's what I had with me. So Ted says, I told him I was there outside the building. He pops his head out of another end of the building because he was new to the building himself. So we finally get in and talk and introduce ourselves. And he's from Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania. And we hit off well. And I remember watching Ted when I was in Uniontown, Pennsylvania as a youngster. And he was a quarterback with the Steelers at one time. And the story goes, I don't know how true it is, that they kept Marchibroda instead of Johnny Unitas.
Ooh.
I don't know if that's a true story or not, but I heard.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. And so anyhow, so Ted and I interviewed that morning and visited. Well, he had Nelson Muncie, my hometown buddy and also Wyoming teammate, there with the Baltimore Colts. And Nelson was a defensive back for them. And we shared stories about Nelson and what have you. Interviewed that morning and had lunch, and early in the afternoon he says, hey, I want to hire you. And I was excited, and he said, would you be interested in coming? I said, yes, definitely. So he took me into Jim Irsay early that afternoon and told Jim he wanted to hire me. So he hired me, and then ended up being with the Colts for 19 seasons and 5 head coaches later, which was a blessing. Truly, man. I mean, I was very fortunate to work for him. And then Lindy Infante, Jim Mora, then Tony Dungy, then Jim Caldwell. And that's when I was released after that 19th year. So, but had a great run. Never looked back one moment, no regrets. And had some great people to work with. I know you guys mentioned Marshall and Edgerrin right off the bat, because those two are the Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
But I use those guys, and the thing that's most important to me is that we find backs that want to block, that want to block. And I was a stickler on blocking as a college receiver coach. And I know we had Irving Fryer at Nebraska when I was up there, and Preston knows how I was about blocking here in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time having a player, and I won't mention his name, but and you know it is Preston. So I called him out about blocking.
Yeah, you did.
And boy, he was old, no muscle in his calf, thin, wiry guy, But I have to, hey, son of a gun became one of our better blockers. Once I called him out a little bit and didn't want to shame him too much. But he did end up being a pretty good blocker. And you have the block. If you're going to run the football, then you have to have wideouts out on the perimeter and tight ends blocking people. And that's always been a thing of mine, and it's always been with me. And Irving Fryer at Nebraska, number 1 pick as a receiver, and we're on a running football team. So it was important to me. Once I got into the pros and I'm coaching running backs, I always told running backs this: protect the position of quarterback in the pass protection part of it. And I spent a lot of time on that. It was important to me. And I never mentioned people's names. I never said protect Peyton Manning or protect this elite player. I said protect the position of quarterback, because I don't care if it was Peyton Manning playing the position, or whomever it may have been, protect that person playing that position. So you don't have a drop off or, okay, he's out of the ball game, so I can slack off here and get somebody hurt. Well, Marshall first and some guys before that that were playing here before Marshall Faulk came. And he was a very smart, sharp guy in understanding protections. He was, in some ways, Marshall studied stuff. Marshall was sharp. And I was always appreciative of his efforts in doing what I asked him to do. And he was his own man, more importantly. He and Edgerrin both were their own men. And I liked the way they stood tall in all situations. And so with those two being what they were as far as the blocking part of it, the other stuff came. They were there to protect that position of quarterback. And Marshall did a great job with it. Edgerrin did a great job. I remember watching Edgerrin James. And they're both outstanding runners and receivers. We all know all those things about it.
Yep.
But that physical thing of standing up there toe-to-toe when you know you're out, manned by that guy coming off that edge, as fast as they were coming, bigger, stronger people, but they put their nose on folks and they fought them. And that's what I really greatly appreciate and still do today of all those guys that I had the opportunity to coach, not just those two, but the others behind them learned from watching film of what was expected. I watched Edgerrin James his junior year coming out against UCLA, had a great game out there. And that's the year he came out. And we had Ricky Williams from Texas that I was as a position coach, you had to write up reports from all these guys. But I really felt that Edgerrin suited the Colts more so than Ricky. Not that Ricky wasn't a great player, and Heisman Trophy and all those things from Texas. But you had to have a guy that was a complete player in all phases. And it was important to me to have one that was a man standing back there. Not that Ricky wasn't. This is nothing about Ricky. This is more about what was suited for the Colts and what we were going to have to do in the areas of pass protection. And I felt that Edgerrin at the time was the guy. And that's how I wrote my reports up, and I still have those today. And I know there were eyebrows raised and things, whatever, when Bill Polian made that announcement that he was the president at the time that we were going to draft Edgerrin. And people were, what? You crazy?
I remember. That was on TV.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Coach,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead,
Can we
Coach.
pause 1 second? Can we pause it? Can we?
Oh, it's tough to pause when we're recording. Yeah, unfortunately. But and we've kept you a long time.
No.
So we want to be sensitive to you. But do you have a great story? Because we're up for it, but we have a guest coming right behind you. So
I got to tell you two real quick ones.
Okay, you got it.
The thing that helped me the most in my coaching was a lady named Ruth Dunn back in my hometown of Uniontown, PA, when I was in 6th grade. She chose me to do the blackboard and clean that slate board. And you couldn't leave any streaks on that board. You cleaned the chalk erasers and you vacuumed the chalk dust out of them. And you cleaned that board back and forth with a sponge and a bucket of cold water that you changed 3 or 4 times where you left no streaks. Then at the end of the day, she'd be gone. The whole school would probably empty except maybe me and one of the custodians. And then I'd always find a dime at the end of that chalk tray on Friday. And I'd go to Murphy's 5 and dime, give me 2 bags of cookie crumbs, 1 cent a piece.
Cookie crumbs.
Cookie crumbs, the remnants of all that week of cookie crumbs, right?
Wow.
And I had 8 cents in my pocket and I was rich. And so that dime, she left me a dime. Here's that. It's not the exact dime, but she left me a dime. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so when I left the Colts and I turned out the light for the last time in that office, I stuck a dime. I scotch taped it to the end of the chalk tray for the next guy following me. But that is what started me on Marshall, Edgerrin, Dominic. You guys do it over and over and over until it's done right.
Mm-hmm.
And Dominic Rhodes started for Edgerrin James, was the first undrafted free agent rookie in the history of the league. We went to the Super Bowl with him and then die. And I brought them both in my office and I said, listen, I'm going to start Dominic because he took over for Edgerrin, and Edgerrin got hurt in 2005. Yeah. In 10 ball games, he gained over 1,000 yards. Mm-hmm. First undrafted free agent rookie to do that. But he did it because he bought into the pass protection, too. He understood it where it freed him up to be a better runner.
Yep.
Because he wasn't sitting there listening to all those Omaha.
Yeah.
Omaha,
He didn't get all tied up into that. Freed his mind up, and he played very well for us. We brought him back 2 different times
Sure
through
did.
his career playing to help us here.
Yeah.
But those are some of the things, and the last one I got to go. But I was there. Franco Harris was the exception, but I was in jail before it happened. I was in Pittsburgh. My running back coach from Oakland Raiders at the time, he was my running back coach in college. He gave me 4 tickets, and I couldn't use them because my relatives didn't want to go. I was home recruiting for Wyoming. Was out in front of 3 Rivers scalping tickets like everybody else. Didn't know scalping laws. It put me in a paddy wagon, took me 10, 15 minutes away. I came back to the game with about maybe 4 or 5 minutes left in it, or seconds, sat next to Ben Davidson in my Oakland Raiders seats, turned around, Franco gets the immaculate reception. I was 25 years old, and at that time, witnessing that game and that play.
Never knew that story.
I know.
Never. Oh my gosh. You held
And
that
I called
one
Joe
from-
Green. Joe and I have been friends for a lot of years on 68 playing East-West Shrine game.
Mhm.
I called him the other day after Franco's death and so forth, but it was awesome.
Wow.
Coach, listen, straight talk here. We
Yeah.
need to have you back on. I feel Preston, I know will agree.
Oh,
I feel
yeah.
like we've barely tapped some of the great knowledge and
there's plenty.
experiences.
I've got years of it.
Yeah, I mean, please,
Sometimes.
if you're up to it, we'd like to have you back on.
Oh, and he's a hell of a
Yeah.
golfer, by the way. I got to
Oh,
throw that in. Oh, yeah. Oh,
okay.
he comes to New Mexico to golf. Let me tell you.
Okay. Well, Coach,
Yeah.
we can't thank you enough. And that last story might be one of the most epic things I've ever heard. And by the way, my grandfather was Pennsylvania Dutch from Western Pennsylvania.
There you go, Yuns.
So,
Are Yuns okay?
yeah, he was a
Yeah.
remarkable man. So I have some elders from there too. He's passed away, but he had an impact. Amazing.
all right.
We got to ask you a couple of quick 2-minute drill questions because I understand some of these might have interest to you, and we are definitely going to have you back on. That Franco Harris immaculate, that's a mind blower. Even Preston said, "Oh wow, okay." Real quick, Coach, 2-minute drill. Player and coach, grass or turf?
I like grass.
Yes. It's undefeated. It's undefeated,
Yes,
Preston.
I know.
Okay. This one might be, I understand this might go right to the heart here. Barbecue ribs or enchiladas?
I'll take the ribs.
I hear you're a grill master.
Oh, yeah. From years back.
Okay. Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Interesting. Me too. We're unique, Coach. Okay. Favorite movie?
Favorite movie was To Kill a Mockingbird.
Ooh.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Nice.
Solid.
Yes.
Solid classic there. Okay. That's reminded me of my grandfather, by the way. Okay. Your most underrated teammate at any level?
Most underrated teammate.
Or player in your case, because you have such
Player.
a unique. Yeah.
Jeez, it was. Wow. That's a hard. Most underrated.
I mean, 272 NFL games with the Colts. I don't even know if you can remember all your players.
Well, underrated. I'd have to really pick 2 of them: Joseph Adai and Dominic Rhodes,
Mm-hmm.
who both bought into what I tried to get them to buy into, and that was, I'm going to start Dominic. You're the number 1 pick coming out of LSU. You're going to have to believe what I'm trying to get done, because he ran by committee at LSU, and he bought into what I was trying to get done and accomplished. They were both fresh going into the Super Bowl. Adai started it, but yet Tony Dungy had told me once, I said, hey, they're going to maybe come after you about Adai not starting. I can start Adai instead of Dominic. He said, Gene, keep doing it the way you've been doing it.
Okay.
And that was
Oh my
leadership.
God.
Yeah.
That's going to be clipped and highlighted. That's an incredible story.
That
and
was
then
leadership.
that is leadership. And finally, in conclusion, who plays Coach Huey in a movie about your life?
Yeah, well, I think we probably stumped him on that one. Denzel's out the question.
He's popular.
He may not even be born yet, whoever it is.
I love it. I love it.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Coach. Coach, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
I promise you I'm going to chase Preston to bring you back on because I feel like we barely tapped your stories
This was fun.
and
Thank you.
some of the anecdotes you could share with younger generations and whatnot.
Yes, yes.
Thanks a million.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate
We
it.
will chase you. Folks, what an incredible week here at Gridiron Icon. And if for our YouTube watchers of this podcast, Preston is holding up an epic photograph of Coach Huey with two of the best I've ever watched in my life. By the way, Marshall Faulk blocking. Us Rams fans know Marshall Faulk's blocking is absolutely superior. It's a film must for a running back.
And you know, I'll tell you one thing too. I know we talk about them, but their mothers were great people that I always enjoyed visiting with. Both those mothers, Marshall and Edgerrin. Awesome.
Outstanding.
As a guy raised by a single mom,
Yes.
I really, really grab onto those stories. And I heard you mention Preston's mom earlier. So
Yes.
Gene, I love you. I love you. Thank
too.
you for coming on,
Guys,
man.
take
I
care.
certainly-
Thank you again.
Thank you
Thanks
for
a
my
million,
career,
folks.
too.
Yeah, love it. Folks, follow us at Gridiron Icon. You can find myself and Preston at all the usual spots where podcasts are hosted, as well as on YouTube, where you can see Coach Huey and some of those great pictures. We're going to have him back on. We will see you next week. Thanks again, Coach.
Thank you, guys.